So, welcome all to this last session of the day. We've been already through a long journey together. After our exchanges this morning about on how territorial cohesion is impacted by overlapping crises, starting with the COVID pandemic, and then now the war against Ukraine, and also tomorrow probably climate change. You have had the opportunity to discuss this afternoon either the digital transition or cultural heritage, or maybe also housing dynamics. And we hope that this all provided you with inspirational ideas and food for thought for the day. But now that we are approaching the end of this first day, we would like to reflect about some more topical, maybe territorial challenges in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic, and how local authorities, the cities and the regions, are currently trying to face them and to bring new policy answers to foster what is now used to be called territorial resilience. So we'll be offering you now, to conclude this day, two presentations of a different nature. One will be more conceptual, the other will be a little bit more practical. And I will start with the first one, which is about the concept of the 15-minute city, or its extension, the 30-minute territory, given by Mr. Carlos Moreno. So I don't know if you know him. Carlos Moreno is Colombian. He's professor at the Paris University. He's specialized in study of complex system and innovation processes, and is also recognized as a world influential thinker, advising many mayors of among the biggest cities in the world. They appreciate, we think, his work and also the proposals he made on urban matters, in particular because he was one of the pioneers for the concept of smart cities. So he should have been here with us in Lille, but due to some for unfortunate and last-minute constraints, he couldn't do it. So as he couldn't come to us, then we decided to go to him. We visited him in Paris, and Lorraine, our very precious ESPON monitoring committee representative for France, so she made an interview with him, asking him the questions that we would have liked to ask him if he would have been with us here. So you will see just like a part of this interview. The full video will be available on the ESPON website in a couple of days. So we propose you this video. Of course, we are not like a movie theater, so we're not offering popcorns, but you can still sit back, relax, and then we'll go back live here with a panel and discussion and the other presentation in around 10 minutes. So please, the video.
Professor Moreno is an expert of a lot of things. He's a scientist, and he is an expert of complex systems, and therefore logically he's an expert of smart cities and of cities in general. And he is the author of a challenging and interesting concept, which is the 15-minute city, and we went to ask him to explain a little bit of this to us.
Thank you for this kind invitation for discussing on my research and academic work.
You're the author of this 15-minute city concept. What new things does it bring to the table? And especially, I'd like to know, is it really for big cities only? How can you sort of declinate these, adapt this concept to other sizes of city? Does it work for any city and any territory? How does it work?
Yes, my scientific contribution is based on to define a new model for cities, regardless of the size of cities, the density, the economic and the social particularities, because we have considered that in all cities we have 6 crucial points for delivering a real quality of life. What are? The first one, to live in the good conditions, the social housing, the good conditions for materials and for having enough surface for inhabitants. The second point is to work with the radical reduction of long commute, with the decentralized work. The third one is to supply in shorter distances with the shorter circuits. The fourth, to take care of mental and physical health. The fifth, to access to education, culture. And the last but not least, to enjoy with biodiversity, with water and air, without pollution, with green areas resilient for climate change. We have proposed this model based on 6 essential functions for the compact zone, the 50-minute city, or for the middle and low densities, the 30-minute territory. The concept is the same concept with the different implementation. In the 50-minute city, we have the possibility to offer an access within a short perimeter on foot or by bike. In the 30-minute territory, we need, of course, to include other mobilities, in particular electric vehicles, on-demand transport, etc. With this vision, based on this model, we have the possibility to implement this way for the shorter distances, 50-minute city, 30-minute territory, in different sizes of density of territories. This is the concrete case today in Europe, because we have the possibility to implement in a city as Paris, Rome, Milan, and at the same time, in the very, very small cities, even ruralities. We needed to develop a new paradigm, a new methodological guidelines for fighting against climate change, and at the same time to develop local economies, local jobs, to create added value, and to develop a more inclusive city for develop a strong social link and to fight against racism, poverty, and social exclusion.
Okay, let's talk about the impact of COVID, and let's talk about people. In your last book, Urban Life and Proximity in Times of COVID, you argue for a more human approach in cities. How do you see the role of stakeholders in cities? How do you anticipate that you won't have always the same usual suspects meddling?
The COVID-19, in reality, on the one hand, it is still now, a real drama, because for the first time in the modern era, we have this planetary pandemic with the tragic consequences. On the other hand, I consider that the COVID-19 pandemic, it is still now, a great opportunity for changing our urban and territorial lifestyle. The first point, with the COVID-19, in just a few days, a few weeks, we needed to change radically our daily commute for embracing new technologies, for learning to have an access with the remote jobs, but not only. I think that the most relevant point was our new perception of the useful time, because during the COVID-19, this is a compulsory to live in the lockdown, to live in proximity, to explore our public space in proximity, green areas, to find local shops in our neighborhoods, and we have this possibility to take back again control of our useful time. For the 50-minute city, for the 30-minute territory, it was a totally new way for developing worldwide this concept. the mayors, the local governors, the International Association of Mayors, for example, the C40 cities, a very important global network of mayors fighting against climate change, and the private stakeholders were totally involved for embracing this concept and to propose the new ambitious roadmap for imagining to live differently during the COVID-19, and the most important, for continuing to develop this new trajectory after COVID-19. I think that 2 years after the beginning of the COVID-19, in reality, we have today a radical change in the mindset of several mayors around the world for proposing a new ways for taking proximity as the core of the new urban policy and the new territorial policy. And the private sector today is a great partners. For example, the real estate sector for developing more building, for reusing, for hosting several different activities in the same place, for developing not the big shop centers, the big malls and the outskirts, but to introduce the local shops in cities, for working for developing more green areas in public spaces, for reducing the places of cars, for opening more and more public services in the neighborhood, for developing more health services, because the COVID-19 is the first global pandemic and certainly is not the last, unfortunately. But this is today a new situation for anticipating the new pandemics, maybe.
In a recent ESPON study on the economic and territorial impacts of COVID, we observed that the pandemic contamination, the main culprit was interactions between people. How can we imagine to reconcile health rules observance and a minimum of social cohesion?
Today, with the new situations with the COVID-19, I think that proximities is one of the ways for reconciling the local economic development and to with the involvement of citizens for having more and more social activities for developing strong social links. Jane Jacobs, the North American activist, when she proposed in the 70s the concept of living city, she said, a livable city is a city when we could have anytime, anywhere, multiple choices. For the 50-minute city, for the 30-minute territory, this is the golden rule. And for the economic activities, for the social activities, this is at the center of this new paradigm, to have in all circumstances, in all moments, multiple choices for working, for supplying, for having medical services, for using public spaces in the intergenerational ages, for taking care with gender equity, for children, etc. I think that we have a powerful proposal in order to satisfy the economical needs for developing a more resilient economy, and at the same time for developing more sociability, because we need absolutely sociability in cities, because in other case we will have maybe a very interesting economy without people that take a real social benefit. And this is today our challenge. We don't have an only ecological challenge. We have a social, economical, and ecological challenge.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you
your
for
time.
your invitation.
And now we will go back to the panel.
And we are back in Lille. So please, Olivier, Marie-Lorraine, join me on stage. So just maybe, yes, they are there. So Carlos Moreno just told Marie-Lorraine that he found that the mindsets of high-level decision makers have changed with the COVID. So this is not just like political marketing, but it really happened. He said, in particular, he was mentioning these mayors of the big cities he's working with. But what about the people? What about the economic actors? For them as well, the relationship to the places they are settled in has changed. There is a mistrust now towards also public transport. The newspapers are telling us that rural areas become more and more attractive, that housing market dynamics have been affected and so forth. So against that background, what model of development can be proposed which will allow to combine, as he was saying, people new expectations, but also the climate and the economic objectives that the regions, that the local authorities, but they still have to achieve as well. And it was recalled this morning, if you remember, that when we were discussing the 8th Cohesion report, that the long-standing focus on the metropolitan areas as main drivers for generating wealth and development should be now adjusted. So there is now a new clear focus on the rural areas in the territorial approaches at the EU level, but all this goes, of course, beyond the simplistic divide between urban and rural places. So there is a need for differentiated trajectories for European territories, as it was mentioned at the very beginning of this seminar by Philippe Chikovslav on behalf of the French presidency. This morning he was saying how to achieve common strategic objectives at EU level while adapting priorities of cohesion policy to the specific needs and territorial context. So to help us unveiling a bit the complexity beyond the different territorial development models and what they entail also in terms of different policy answers, we have asked Olivier Bouba-Olga to present us some reflections on this topic. So why Olivier? Why him? I will explain a little bit the logic. Well, first and foremost, Olivier is a researcher and a professor, like many of you in this room. Is working, teaching at the University of Poitiers. And Olivier is feeding the French academic debate for a long time with a long-standing, original, but also non-mainstream approach. And I will explain a little bit. He has been celebrating the diversity of territorial development models in times when the huge majority of researchers, in particular in France, following Paul Krugman's, that you know, all these fellow, the new geographic economy, all these people were praising the unique role and performance of metropolitan areas in the wealth of regions and countries, a sort of parallel with the trickle-down economics, which was considering that major urban city as the one and only engine for European growth. But it is not the only reason. It's also because for 2 years, Olivier has decided to engage directly in policy making, and is now working for a regional council, the region Nouvelle Aquitaine, with Bordeaux as main city, for those who know. It's southwest of France, where he's in charge of territorial observation and territorial foresight activities. So from this new perspective, it's also for him more easy to be aware about how to activate the various policy instruments to try to answer the challenges he spent his whole life to analyze. So Olivier will speak in French. So please, if you could take some earsets, if you need some translation in English. So they have been provided here for those who don't have. Nikos, if you could maybe support for the people who would need some earset for the translation, the interpretation, sorry. And Olivier, I'll leave you, please take the floor to time the people get equipped. You've got the remote control.
Yes. Ok. Merci beaucoup pour ces premiers éléments.
Thank you very much for this introduction. I'm going to wait a few seconds for everyone to get equipped.
C'est bon. Ok. Bon, merci beaucoup pour
Thank you very
l'invitation.
much for inviting me to this panel.
Très limité, très court. L'idée là, c'est effectivement de faire
So to be brief,
peut-être quelques idées clés, quelques
my
messages.
goal would be to share some ideas with you.
Le message général, effectivement,
The general
tu l'as un peu dit,
message
mais
was already summarized
c'est
during the
peut-être aller un peu
introduction.
contre la tendance que
The goal
on a
is to go
souvent
against the
à vouloir,
trend that we generally have
simplifier un peu trop
when
les
we want
analyses, être à
to
la recherche
simplify the
d'un
analysis.
récit un peu simple.
We want
qui
to
nous
have
explique le monde,
a simple
quelques
explanation
catégories,
for the
quelques
world
discours, etc.
with a few words only, a few
C'est un peu la tendance,
speeches.
me semble-t-il, dans plein de domaines.
This is a
y
trend that we
compris
can
en
see in all of
développement
areas
territorial.
and in
Donc,
territorial
c'est
development as
déconstruire un
well.
peu ça,
So the goal is to go
déconstruire un peu
against
la
this.
tendance à simplifier les choses,
The goal is to go
être sans cesse à la
against this
recherche d'un
simplifying
modèle
trend,
générique de
looking
développement
for a
territorial
generic
pour
development
aller vers
strategy
effectivement éloge de la diversité,
and
éloge
to
de la
focus on
complexité,
diversity,
et puis,
to focus on
importance de la
complexity,
différenciation,
and to focus on
territoriale et
territorial
de l'action sur les
differentiation,
territoires.
and to
Et ça
focus
veut
on
pas
the
dire
different
pour
actions
autant,
that
mais
are
peut-être on
currently
reviendra
run
dans
out
la
on the
discussion,
territory. It doesn't mean that we
qu'il
don't
y a
have to
rien à
enter
faire,
the
qu'on ne peut rien
discussions,
faire.
doesn't mean that we don't have to do
Ça me semble
anything,
important
there's
dans
nothing we need to do. I really wanted to insist on this.
prise en compte de la complexité
We
de
really
la
need to take into account the
Donc,
diversity and the
j'ai un
complexity
petit
of our
diaporama, je vais
territories.
insister avec
So
deux,
I
trois,
have
trois,
a
quatre
small
éléments
presentation,
complémentaires sur,
and I'm going
sur-
to focus
sur
on
quelques-
different
sur quelques
elements
idées.
and key
Alors, éloge de la
ideas.
complexité, peut-être un
So
point d'entrée. Alors,
first,
j'ai fait pas mal de
complexity.
travaux plutôt sur le cas français, mais quelques-uns sur
I've
le
been
cas européen
working
aussi.
on
Donc,
France
ça, c'est
and
une
on
première diapositive,
Europe as well. So this is the
où
first
j'ai
slide.
travaillé. Alors, je suis pas le premier, d'autres l'avaient fait avant moi.
A lot
mais
of people
je
have
pense que
been
c'est
working on this
important de le
before me.
rappeler
I'm
sans
not the
cesse.
first one to have been
Sur,
working on this.
un indicateur important,
We have been working on a very important indicator, I think, in the European level, the GDP per capita. So this is an indicator that is widely used, that is very useful, but is quite limited. So I'm not talking about the limits for the GDP per capita at the national level. I'm talking about the regional level. There are a lot of limits, even though we are still using it. You'll be able to have access to this presentation afterwards and have access to the specific work that have been carried out. We have worked on the different GDP results per capita in Europe with 15 members, and we can see that there are statistics that can be extracted from those results. We have regions with a very high GDP per capita, but it doesn't mean that those regions are more performant, because the GDP per capita is not a performance criteria. It relies on a lot of different factors itself. And on the slide, you can see that there are different columns, and we can see that the GDP per capita is the GDP per employment. So this is what economists called apparent productivity rate and production per inhabitant. And so we can have a region with a very strong GDP per capita, not because its working apparent productivity is higher, but because its ratio, its employment ratio per inhabitant is higher. And the contrary is true as well. We can, for example, have a lower ratio and a higher GDP rate. This is something that we can observe in cross-border countries. We have, for example, in the Lorraine region, a lot of people working in Germany, and so the ratio is lower in this region compared to the other regions in France. So if you have a look at the GDP per employment, per job, it's much better. And same goes for Picardy, because we have a lot of people working in the Île-de-France region. And with these ratios, we can also have a lot of other columns. We can also have working apparent productivity, but the term apparent is very important. I'm not going to enter the details, but we have a lot of other effects like specialization that show that we do not talk about productivity per se. And we are facing a major challenge. We don't know how to measure regional GDP. And so we use salaries. And so the difference between the regions are based on salaries. And it has a strong impact on a lot of countries. I have worked on France a lot, and it has a strong impact on the Île-de-France region, for example. But it's not only related to productivity, it's also because of the fact that we have a concentration of big salaries in this region, in the capital region. So when we analyze in details the GDP per capita, we can see that it's not only about economic performance. We have a lot of processes, socio-economic processes that can explain the situation in which the regions are currently. And if we do not analyze the results into details, we have a simplified explanation. And this way, we are making a lot of mistakes. And so the analysis is wrong, and so the actions that are then implemented are wrong as well. Of course, there are a lot of information on the slides. The goal is not to cover everything. We have also carried out analysis in France, in some municipalities in France, which are called intercommunalités. So it's under the level of regions, and we have focused on performance. We don't have any indicators. Here you have the indicators I've been working with. So demographics indicators, population growth, employment growth, level of income as well. So for those two slides, this one and the next one, I wanted to show that when we analyze the demographics differences with the performance indicators, we can see that there are strong differences. So the goal here is to say that demographics and geography do have an impact. It's true that there are differences among regions, but those differences are not that high compared to the differences that we are observing inside the regions, inside the municipalities. We have social processes that are very important at this level, and this is something that we can observe in the figures. So we have a lot of figures here. We have 102,000 municipalities. So we have a growth here in 2018, 2018, plus 4%. So we can see that there are a lot of gaps for the employment rate. We also have 3.5% for the minimum rate. For the lower employment rates, and we also have 25.3% for the maximum level of employment rate. So you can see big differences among the territories. And the goal is to understand the reasons why we are facing such differences. And this is why complexity is really important in geography. There's something we really need to focus on systematically. Behind those differences, we can also have effects that are related to the size of the territories, agglomerations, for example, and we also have effects that are related to whether the territory is urban or rural, and we also have macro-territorial effects. So we have territories that are doing better than others. It doesn't mean that they're small or because they're more rural or more urban. It's just because they are located in a region that is not doing well, in a macro territory that is not doing that well. And so this table is a result of the work that we've been carrying out. So we have tested the geographic effects that well explain the differences between the regions and territories. We have been using this method for the 15 indicators we have used. And you have first 23% for population growth from 2008 to 2018. What does it mean? Well, we have different population growth rates. And what it means is that belonging to one region explains 23% of those differences. Then you can have a look at density, population density, and density only explains 2% of the rate. Second column, the size of the territory, based on the number of inhabitants, and it only explains 1% of the differences among territories. So the main factor explaining the differences in terms of performance is the region, for France at least. And we've been using this strategy for the 15 indicators, and what really matters here is the macro-regional level and the macro-regional process. If you use, for example, a map of France, you can see the demographic dynamics, and you can see that in the western part of France and in the northern parts of France, we can see very good results, and something that we do forget because we have been obsessed with job and wealth growth and creation, so we are focused on metropolis and agglomerations. And a lot of people think we need to focus on middle cities and rural areas, but it's more complex than that. For French cities, it's more about macro-territorial effects. Of course, it doesn't explain anything. It accounts for 50% of the explanation. We also have specialization, consequences, the history of the territory does matter as well. And so, thanks to all of those effects, we can deduce that we really need to focus on diverse policies. Of course, regions are different. Some regions do better, and so maybe we should focus on all the regions. For example, in the western part, on the south, for example, we have heterogeneous results, and so we need to understand what's going on this territory to have differentiated actions.
Other element of analysis on another topic, actually, I was mentioning it earlier on. After the large metropolis in France, we had the idea of fleeing into the rural areas somehow. I mean, researchers are being asked the questions all the time. I mean, it's very complicated. We have very little data, but in the New Aquitaine region, we had a privileged access to the school enrollment data. I mean, that's data that I've used. I mean, we don't have any data about people moving houses. So how can we capture the existence of people moving from the large cities to territories. I use the school registers. I mean, if there have been a lot of people migrating from large cities to rural areas, maybe families, whole families moved with their children, so more going to a rural school than in a large city institute. So I had this data in 2020 for the French cities. So what we can see is that we don't have any massive exodus in France on the basis of this data. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing happening. I mean, there are little things happening. And what we call the metropolis, I mean, the 22 largest cities in France, before the COVID, at the growth rate of the enrollment in school in the first degree was the most dynamic category before the COVID, and between 2021 is a category of growth which has become negative, or the most negative. The community of communes of cities reached an average level. So it's not a massive exodus, but I mean, we have people moving. We have signs of people who used to live in a larger city moving to two other categories of territories, either close to the big cities. That's what we call the untightening of the metropolitan area, and some people moving further away from the large cities, moving to the rural areas. So that used to exist. I mean, it does exist today. It's not. We can't talk about an exodus as such, but I mean, things are happening. Almost the last idea. Am I okay for time? Yeah. So, well, a few examples now. As far as the region performance, I mean, the idea that we would have significant differences between small and large territories and between urban or rural territories is not validated. In France, anyway. I mean, what I'm giving you here is for France. So it's not validated. It's a principle of reality. So it's not valid. So let's get that out of our minds. That doesn't mean that we don't have any difference between the rural and urban areas. We have some differences which are important, not linked to performance, socio-economic indicators, but more to access to services, for instance. That's a study we did with the NCT, available at community level, where at the city level, some researchers from Dijon, together with the NCT, studied different levels of centralized services. Level 0, very little services. Level 4, we've got all the universities, all the services available. So what we looked at, I mean, on the French side, out of the 35,000 cities, we found level 1, 2, 3, 4 cities. The share of the rural cities, level 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the access time when a city is not level 4, how long is it away from a level 4 city by road? So in this table, if you look at the right part of the table, the access time, I mean, in France, on average, a city, so-called rural one with a low density in population, we are at 35 minutes away by road when there's no traffic from a level 4 city. When we're an urban one, we're at 15 minutes, sorry. And so we have differences which are quite meaningful on quite a wide range of services and equipment. We'll continue working, making a point on access to health services, to education, to leisure equipment. So we've got a strong rural impact, but there's heterogeneity associated with it. I mean, that doesn't mean that if you're in an urban city that you don't have any access problems. Another point which adds more complexity still is that access issues are not very well correlated. We've got some rural countries which are far away with problems with access to health services, but no problem with access to other services. So what are the challenges? This might be my last slide, and that's the title. I mean, you've got to go from this being obsessed with the performance. The crucial topics we've got to deal with is access to services and equipment. And there are challenges to be faced, and we've got to analyze them in a smart way. I mean, we're not going to develop that. I mean, we might develop that during the discussion. There are things to be done, but it's got to be based on specific analysis of topics to be dealt with.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Olivier, for helping us also understand or approach this complexity. Now it's time to debunk the complexity a little bit, and I will start maybe the discussion. I hope the interpretation went well, because you spoke like quite somehow fast, and I'm not certain that everyone get everything, but okay, we'll assume it. Then before coming back to what you just presented, I would like to maybe ask a question to Marie-Lorraine. If you may, because so Olivier just concluded about one of the main challenges you see, that is how we can now innovate in improving the accessibility to services to the population.